All right, HTC One, Samsung Galaxy S4. This is going to be an honest review, a real-world review of these two phones and how they compare to each other. If you guys are fans of my videos, you know that I like to keep it real. I don't pull any punches, and I like to give you an honest take of how I feel about these two devices. So let's jump right in. Well, what do we have? We have an HTC One over here, the silver model, and I think this is an S4, but maybe it's an S3. I can't really tell because Samsung didn't really change the design. No, I'm kidding. It is an S4, but I do like to joke and say that they've copied Apple and released the S3S because the spec bump in here and the change in hardware isn't really that different from the S3. It feels, looks, and acts a lot like the S3, but we'll get into more of that later. And talking more about the design, we've got a nice aluminum unibody construction here on the HTC One, and we have a plastic sort of back on the S4. They both feel pretty good in your hand. I mean, the One is definitely heavier and more substantial, more solid feeling, very much like the iPhone 5. If you've held an iPhone 5, you know it sort of feels really good. It feels really solid. Apple did a really good job with their design here, and I think HTC has not necessarily copied Apple, but they've taken similar aspects and elements of that design and put it into the HTC One. Samsung definitely feels cheaper, definitely feels plasticky. That's not necessarily bad, it's just the way it is. You know, the phone itself does feel good in your hand, it's just a plastic versus metal difference. One of the downsides to having this metal body is fixability. I know iFixit has talked about, you know, the difficulty in repairing this phone, and if you look at some of the problems here, I've actually dropped this phone a couple times, and I've managed to give it some pretty substantial dents in this aluminum. I don't know if this camera is going to resolve that, but you can see some of the damage here if I can get this thing to focus. There's some pretty significant aluminum dings in here from being dropped. So that's something to consider. If you drop your phone a lot and if you're prone to sort of dropping it on concrete like I am, if this breaks, you're kind of stuck according to the guys on the internet. Whereas the Galaxy, you know, it's plastic, so it's going to bounce a little bit more. The back is totally removable, so that's pretty nice. You can replace the back. Obviously, if you dent the rim or crack the screen, you'll have to replace that. But the fixability of the S4 over the HTC One is a pretty big deal if you're likely to break your phone. So other hardware to talk about, notably, HTC has these great front-facing speakers on here, which is really, really nice to have, especially if you're listening to music on the phone itself. Keeps it really, really great to hear. You know, both these stereo speakers sound really awesome. You can put this phone down on the ground or on a bench, put your music on and really listen to it. You know, the Galaxy, on the other hand, has the speaker on the bottom. So if it's sitting like this, it's kind of useless because it's actually projecting down into your surface as opposed to projecting out to the user, which is pretty awesome. Both have front-facing cameras. Both have similar power buttons. The HTC has this nice IR blaster up top, which I've yet to find a real use for, but maybe somebody else does. Bad thing about that power button being there is that if you hold your phone in your left hand like I do, it kind of makes it hard to reach. The Galaxy is nice because you got the volume rocker here for your thumb, and you have the power button on your index finger, so if you hold the phone with your left hand, it's actually pretty easy to use. The opposite is true for this. I end up always tweaking the volume when I go and try and reach the power, or I have to do this with my thumb. Anyway, home button in the center, similar to the other Samsung phones. HTC has actually removed a button. They've removed the menu button. They have a home and a back, which is different from their previous stylings. Other hardware features, nothing you guys haven't seen before. Flashes on the cameras, 13 megapixel camera on this guy, which is pretty awesome. 4 megapixel camera on the HTC One with their ultra pixel, I think it's called, or whatever. We'll get into the camera specs later, but you guys have seen everything on here. You know, they're top of the line phones. They're going to have everything that all the other top of the line phones have. And just take that one step further, you're not going to hear me talk a lot about specs in this review or any of my reviews, and that's because specs really ultimately don't matter. And all the fanboys will get their panties in a pinch with that by saying, oh, well, no, you can't say that because specs are what sell phones and blah, blah, blah. And that's actually not true. And a perfect example of that is the iPhone. There is no mention of any specs anywhere in the iPhone marketing. And the reason why they don't care is because that's not what sells their phones. No one gives a crap about specs. They want something that works well, they want something that's fast, they want something that has a great user experience, and they want something that looks cool and people like. Specs don't do that, okay? Specs make the phone run, sure, and specs make the phone fast, sure, but it doesn't make the phone better than another phone. A perfect example is right here. Perfect example of that is the fact that this S4 is spec'd out to wazoo, and the 1X, or excuse me, the HTC One is still faster and has still much less lag. Just an example here of this Google Voice widget. You can see that it actually loads faster on the HTC One, and sure, it is like 1/3 of a second faster, whatever, but that's evident all throughout the hardware. Excuse me, not hardware, all throughout the OS. Laggy, not laggy. And so yes, specs matter in terms of making the phone what it is, but it doesn't matter in terms of how people interact with the phone and what they get out of it. If we look at these two guys with their screens on, both display brightnesses are set to maximum brightness. The screens on both these phones are phenomenal. If I had to choose between one or the other, I would choose the HTC. The AMOLED on the Galaxy S4 is great, but I think, in my opinion, the color accuracy and just how things look on the HTC One just stands out compared to the S4. I don't know if it's AMOLED versus LCD IPS. I don't know if it's Samsung technology versus whoever makes the screen technology in the HTC. I don't know. I don't care. To me, it doesn't matter in the end. But as a photographer and as somebody who reviews cell phones, I can tell you that the screen on the HTC One is phenomenal. It is by far the best screen on any device I have seen yet to date. Now, take that for what it's worth, because that doesn't necessarily mean the screen on the S4 is particularly any worse. It just means that I prefer the one over the S4. The screen on the S4 is great. It just has that AMOLED look, super saturated colors, really dark blacks, sort of fake looking in my opinion. But that's maybe too strong of a word, because it's still good. It's still nice to look at. I still like it. I just don't like it as much as I like the screen on the One. So jumping into the software, for Android 4.2 on this guy, Android 4.1 on this guy. So, HTC is pretty bad about keeping their customers up to date with software updates from Google. Samsung, on the other hand, has been substantially better. If you root your phones and you like to go down that road and do your own ROM upgrades, there will be support for both these phones, actually, probably really good support because they're pretty popular. So you can keep up to date with the new version of Android. Hopefully HTC takes that to the next level and keeps their non-rooted customers up to date a lot sooner than they have been in the past, but definitely something to consider. Samsung is usually pretty good about keeping people up to date, whereas HTC is not. Now, getting away from Android and moving into sort of what's included with the software, HTC likes to include their own Sense, and they've changed things around with Sense 5. They've made it a lot less in your face, which I actually kind of like. They've included this blink feed feature, which is sort of a social media feed, news feed, that's part of your home screen. And even though I like this, the thing I don't like about it is that I can't actually remove it. You can't get rid of this. It's always on your home screen. You can cover it up by adding a third-party launcher like Nova Launcher, but there's no way to actually remove this panel from your home screen. You can't, it just doesn't go away. So that's kind of annoying. It's always there, regardless of whether or not you use social media. In terms of other software included on the phone, like I said, Sense is lightened up quite a bit. There's some things like parent dashboard and kid mode and a couple other sort of Sense features that I'm not too, I'm not too fond of, but whatever. It's not in your face. They just kind of sit around and they're there, but you don't really interact with them. Samsung, on the other hand, this is using TouchWiz. If you're familiar with TouchWiz, you know that TouchWiz has a lot of bloat with it. TouchWiz has tons and tons and tons of Samsung apps. Samsung, SSS. I hate this crap. I don't use it. Maybe some people do. I certainly do not. And I don't want it on my phone. I'd rather go out and install it myself rather than have it built into the phone and slow things down. And getting back to my comments before about lag, these, all this junk built into these phones is what creates lag, and it's why this phone is so freaking laggy and why I hate it so much. So we'll get into the camera here a little bit. Both these guys have really good cameras. HTC went out on a limb here and tried something new in creating this 4 megapixel ultra pixel camera, which I think that they did a pretty good job with. I think that the quality is good, and that the phone itself is a pretty nice. It's fast and it's good camera. Everything's fast and smooth, and what you'd expect from a top of the line cell phone. Quality is good. Samsung, on the other hand, has their standard, or not standard, but made a 13 megapixel camera in their phone, and it's actually really nice as well. And I think if you look at the online reviews, from places like DP Review, and if you look at what they have to say about it, they actually talk about how the camera in the S4 is better than the rest. And so I would tend to agree. I think it's a great camera in the S4. And so if you're basing your decision to buy one of these phones solely on the camera, S4 is going to win in that regard. Getting into some of the other things, call quality, both pretty much the same between both. I haven't noticed any substantial differences in terms of what I can hear and whether or not people can hear me. Battery life, another thing to talk about. Worse battery life in the S4 than the HTC One. I don't know what Samsung has done, but this phone actually has worse battery life than the S3. I don't know if it's their software or if it's the hardware drawing battery, but you're going to need an external, a separate charger or a removable battery in this guy if you plan on doing a lot of work on this. I use my phone, I would say average between 7 a.m. And 9 or 10 p.m. I can get most of the day probably before I need a charge on this guy. I definitely need a charge starting around 6 o'clock with the S4. Another thing to talk about though is non-removable battery and non-removable storage, and removable battery and removable storage. So if those are important things to consider in your purchasing decision, you can definitely carry a spare battery and spare memory with this guy, whereas you're sort of stuck with the HTC One. Some app tests here just to show you sort of how they compare with their speed. We'll load up Facebook on both these guys and see. They're both connected to Wi-Fi, 10 megabit download connection. You see the HTC One a little bit faster, but then upon update, both pretty close. But again, HTC just a little bit faster there. You can see the difference in the screens too. Again, brightness turned up on both of these guys. HTC sort of looks substantially brighter, fills in those colors a lot better there as well. But you know, scrolling wise, smoother on the HTC. I don't know if the S4, I don't know, the S4 just has lag, and I don't know why it's there, or you know, supposedly you can go into the dev options and turn off animations, and then it'll get rid of it, but you shouldn't have to do that. You shouldn't have to go, you shouldn't have to change what's going on in the internal parts of the phone to make it better. It should be good from the factory. So if we get into another app here, we'll load up Runkeeper just to see the GPS and how fast things go with this. You can see that similar speed, good. Still searching here on the HTC One. So excuse me, now we're back down to fair, but it's going to pull GPS coordinates. Good. So a little bit faster there on the S4, which is nice. We'll check Twitter now just to see what happens here. Very close. Looks like a little bit faster on the S4. Check scrolling about the same. And we'll go home. In closing, I'd like to talk a little bit about what you should think about if you're trying to decide between these two phones. And first of all, they're both great phones. They both have excellent hardware and software features about them. Are they perfect? No. They all have flaws. Well, all phones have flaws. And some of the flaws between the two of these are pretty big differences between the two. And that's kind of what you're going to want to think about when you try and decide between these two. First thing to think about is build quality and how you like aluminum solid sort of feeling phones versus plastic feeling phones, and whether or not repairability is important to you. That's a big deal. The second thing to think about is removable storage and removable battery on the S4, not on the HTC One. The third thing to think about is screen technology. You know, the screen is the thing you interact with. The screen is the thing that you pick up and look at all the time. And in my opinion, the HTC One has a nicer screen. The next thing to think about is audio quality. Beats audio and front-facing speakers on the HTC, back speaker on the S4. You know, if you like to listen to music and you have your phone on a Surface, awesome speakers on this guy. The next thing to think about is camera. If you're using your phone as your primary camera, 13 megapixel camera in this guy, really sick camera. Can't beat it in any phone today. This is the best camera out there right now. So those are some of the things you have to think about, okay? And like I said, I don't like talking about specs. I'm not going to say, oh, this is quad core, 1.5 gigahertz, 2 gigs of RAM, that thing beats everything. No, that's not the case. Because what we've seen is that the HTC One not only keeps up, but in some circumstances is actually quite a bit faster than the S4 in terms of what it can do software-wise. So, you know, specs don't matter, okay? What matters is how the phone interacts in your hand, how you like it, and how sort of fast and great the user experience is, not what it says on paper, okay? So just getting back into sort of how you would decide between these two phones. A lot of people ask me, well, what phone do you carry in your pocket? And truth be told, I actually switch between both these guys. That's why my stuff is on both of them. I pull my SIM out of the HTC One, I put it in the S4 when I get tired of it, and vice versa. I'll go back. If I had to choose, if somebody put a gun to my head and said, pick one of these phones, damn it, I think I would choose the HTC One. Biggest reason is the screen. I like the screen better on the HTC One than I do the S4. Second reason is the speakers. I listen to music a lot, and having the phone down on a surface projects that music out, and that's what I really like. So hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Don't forget to check out my other ones, and rate, comment, and subscribe. Thanks.